And we are live. Hi, everyone. Good evening or morning for you, Tommy. Thank you all for joining at this cool event. For people who don't know me, I'm Bram. I live in the Netherlands and work as a cloud engineer at Brightblue. I have been working with Azure infrastructure as code, automation, CI/CD, but my main focus has been Kubernetes and container security. But in the last couple of months, I decided I want to make a shift to the data engineering field. Since I was already hosting meetups, I started this meetup group, Azure Data Engineering. In the last couple of months, I also came across the name Mage all of a sudden popping up on my LinkedIn feed, and now I just seem to be getting news about Mage all the time on LinkedIn. So there's a lot of traction.
Yeah.
So I joined their Slack community, and I asked if somebody from Mage could give a talk and a demo about Mage in combination with Azure. And tonight we have Tommy Dang, who is co-founder and CTO of Mage. So who better than the man himself to do the talk? If you have any questions during the presentation and the demo, then please put them in the chat, and I will make sure that we discuss it during the talk or either after the demo. So, Tommy, thanks for joining. Really excited about this one. Enjoy, everyone, and the stage is yours, Tommy.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Hello, everyone that's watching. My name is Tommy Dang. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders here at Mage. A little bit of background about myself before I jump into it. I worked at Airbnb for over 5 years. Worked on data tools, dev tools, worked on tools like Airflow, worked on a lot of internally built tools for developers and data engineers. Left in late 2020, early 2021, and started Mage. And Mage, in a nutshell, it's a modern replacement for Airflow. You use Mage to build data pipelines for transforming your data and integrating data from different sources. Now, I can't wait to jump in and show you a demo of all the great functionality in interacting with Azure services. Now, along the way, please ask comments, ask questions, leave comments. I want this to be interactive. I want this to be fun. So please don't hesitate to do that. Now, the presentation will be broken down like this. First, I'll share with you a little bit about how Mage is deployed on Azure, the services it uses. I'll show a diagram. Then we'll jump in and we'll build a pipeline, a standard pipeline, pull data from one place, do some transformations, export it somewhere else. Then we'll build a data integration pipeline. For those that aren't familiar with that term, a data integration pipeline is typically a low to no code way where you can sync data from one source into another source. So we'll be syncing data from blob storage into my Microsoft SQL Server. And then the third pipeline I want to show you is, if you're already using dbt, how you can build models in Mage, dbt models in Mage, and then orchestrate those. Awesome. Let's go ahead and jump
Cool.
in. Awesome.
Looking
Let me
forward to
jump
it.
in and share my screen. Great. So this first image you'll see is a quick diagram. Mage, one of our core design principles is an easy developer experience. And that means not only can you set up Mage locally very quickly, but getting whatever you built into production seamlessly is a very top of mind priority for us. And so Mage, we provide maintained Terraform scripts where you can clone the repo, make a few adjustments, for example, changing the name of the container, etc. And with a few commands, Terraform init, Terraform apply, it'll handle the deployment and connecting all the services together. So what services get deployed when you run Terraform apply? Well, Mage will run in container instances using Docker. It'll run on a private subnet. It will be able to talk to your key vaults. So in case you have any secrets you want to use, like credentials, it will also use a Azure storage to store the actual code that you write. Mage, it's a nice user interface to build data pipelines, and it's also an engine that runs it, but you still write the code that tells Mage hey, this is what I want to do in this step of my pipeline, and this is what I want to do. And secondly, we have a public subnet with an application gateway. That allows you to connect to Mage's UI, so you can build in it, run it, do your monitoring and observability. Great. Now let's go ahead and jump right in. So here I'm loading up Mage. It's running on a specific IP. What you see here is all the pipelines that I've created. And it's reading from the storage. If you ran this locally, it would read from your disk or your file system. Okay, let's go ahead and build our first pipeline. I already created one, but you can create them here, and you can see we support 3 different types. I'm going to go through the standard one first, then data integration. I won't cover the streaming, but that's another really awesome way to use Mage. You can stream data from Azure Event Hub, for example, and stream it to blob storage or Kafka, etc. Awesome. Let's go ahead and click on this one, and we'll start building this. So I'll click edit here. And if you look here, you can see this is just a file system. It has a bunch of files. When you start Mage for the first time, it'll create a few folders for you automatically. And then the rest, you can organize it however you want. You can create subfolders for different teams, for different businesses, for different logic. Is there documentation about this setup on Azure? Absolutely. Yes, we do. We have, yes, we do. I can share that out with you afterwards as well. We have documentation for how to deploy this on Azure. Great question. Thank you for asking that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and see. If you ever used a notebook, a Jupyter notebook, this is that experience. You'll be able to add certain blocks. You can add Python, you can add SQL, you can add R. Now, the way we designed Mage, we designed it to be extremely reusable. Again, one of our core design principles is best engineering practices built in. And that means highly reusable code, modular, well-tested code. So I created a Python. I have a file here that was created in the past. So I can just drag this and drop this in here, just like that. Imagine one of my teammates created this, and maybe it's a common way to load data. I don't have to rewrite it, so I can just reuse it. Now, once I had this file, and if you look here, it's just Python code. I can even comment this out, and all it's going to do is run this right here. So now I can press play, and then I'll be able to preview my code. Pressing that button takes the code and just runs it, and then I can see a preview of the output, just like this. That way I can interactively check, hey, is my code doing what I think it's doing? You know, in contrast to using some of the other tools and having to write out all the code, all the steps in your pipeline, and then deploying it to some staging service and pray that everything works. This way you can quickly iterate faster. Another really great thing, part of engineering best practices built in, is you can write as many tests as you want. I can have as many of these as I want. And all they do, they run your assertions. So right here, every single time I run my block of code, or even when I run my pipeline end to end in production, it will run all of these tests. So here I'm just checking, is there enough rows? Is it greater than 1 and less than 10,000? Let's say it has to be greater than this many rows. Of course, this is going to fail, but I want to show you what that looks like. And so we bring test-driven development into, what's really awesome is we bring test-driven development into data engineering. Okay, let me reset this and put this back. Okay, so next step in my pipeline, I loaded the data now. Let's go ahead and transform this data. So I have a bunch of columns, they don't have underscores or they have a bunch of spaces, there's different capitalizations. Let me go ahead and add some code that will clean this up. I've already written this code before, but let me show you what it could be like if I didn't write this code. So I go ahead and add this. I'll say clean columns. Great, save this. And you'll see here with this visual diagram, you can intuitively tell that this loader block will run first, and then it will pass its data down to this purple block, and that data then becomes available inside of that block. Now, if you've used other tools, you'll know that there is very specific APIs or a domain language or some sort of library or syntax you must learn ahead of time. and you'd have to write the dependencies alongside the code. Part of our design is we separate those. So the flow and dependency between each step is encapsulated in a YAML file over here. And then what actually happens in each step is inside the file itself. That makes it highly reusable. Okay, let me go ahead and paste in some code that transforms this data. And then we can, again, run this and take a look. All right, it's running and we can output soon. Okay, awesome. It lowercased all the column names. It added underscores, etc. Oh, one really cool feature that we can do here is, let's say we wanted to quickly chart our data, just to get a sense of what's going on. You can easily chart your data. You can actually also add in any libraries like Matplotlib, Seaborn, and run your own charts as well. But Mage provides a quick way to do some charting, just to validate that the data represents what you think it is doing. There's good distribution. Okay, the pie chart looks good. Awesome. Time to, if it looks good, we can move on now. Now, the last step I want to do in here is let's send this data somewhere. So what we'll do is we'll export the data to Postgres. So I have this block over here. And I shared before, these two steps are in Python, but this one is in SQL. I shared before, you can mix and match Python, SQL, and R. So here I'm going to choose Postgres. I have a profile set up already with some credentials. These credentials are stored in here, just like that. Okay, let's go ahead and run this. And I have to save it to a schema. Okay, awesome. No, ignore that. Okay, let's go ahead and run this. Awesome. So now what it'll do is, oh, I need to drag this and drop it like that. So now this SQL block will be able to take inputs. So I have Python data coming from here, and it will pass its data down to this block. And how does it do that? Well, you see, you can tell right here that this interpolation will be translated to the data coming from this block called clean columns. And now if I run this, it's basically doing a select star on that data. Just like that, it exported to this, it exported to there. And you can see the preview of it just like that. Awesome. So now we built our batch pipeline. And we wrote a lot of code for that. Now, let's go ahead and build a data integration pipeline. Maybe you don't have such custom needs. Maybe you just have data in one place and all you want to do is move it from one place to another. Let's go ahead and jump into that. So here, I already created this, but how you do this is you click data integration, and then you'd hop over to a similar flow, but here you write a little bit less code. So in this dropdown, I can select, any, we have tons of sources. We use, I don't think you can see this, the dropdown actually, but we have quite a bit of sources. And underneath the hood, we use the Singer spec. So the Singer spec is the most popular way implementation design for doing data integrations. Stitch came up with this a while ago. It's widely adopted. There's over 300 different already built open source code to sync data from different sources and then export that data to different sources as well. And so we decided to adopt this because, one, there's a huge community behind it. It's the standard. A lot of data engineers are familiar with it. And it works really well with how we design Mage. So if you look at Singer, all it's doing is it's executing a Python script and it's piping the output to another Python script. If you saw earlier how Mage works, it's running blocks of code, then it's taking that input and passing it down to the next one. So Singer fits really well in. Now, of course, there's some cons with Singer because there's a lot of outdated libraries, there's no standardization, there's no ownership. However, we've taken a very different approach to this. As teams and companies and users in the community need these, we'll go and find the existing open source library. We'll test it ourselves, we'll validate it, we'll update it, then we'll standardize it, we'll take ownership of it, we'll bring it into the Mage repository, and then we'll be responsible to upkeep it, fix bugs, troubleshoot, etc. That way we overcome some of those shortcomings of lack of ownership and standardization. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's set this up. Actually, I'm just going to jump to the one that I already have set up. So here we selected Azure Blob Storage, and then you put in some connection strings, container names, prefix. Every source has its own configurations that you have to fill in. And then you can click view the streams. I can look at the streams. I already have this selected. So these are just folders within my blob storage. And then the folder contains some CSV files. So we'll automatically detect, we'll grab those files, we'll parse it. And if there's columns on them, then we'll detect the columns. So here I have a bunch of columns here. And what's really great about data integration is you can sync the full table, or you can set it up so that it syncs incrementally. For example, let's say you want to sync your users table and you have 1,000 users, 1,000 IDs. And at the end of today, it's synced user ID 1,000. Well, tomorrow it'll pick up from user ID 1001 and so on. So it doesn't have to do the full table. Also, if you're syncing from a SQL type data source, like MySQL, Microsoft SQL, Postgres, we also support log-based replication. So if you set up your write-ahead logs, Mage will just read those logs and then execute those updates, those inserts, etc. Okay, we'll keep going. Now, all we got to do is choose a destination. I chose Microsoft SQL Server. We have quite a bit. And then you put in your credentials here. And you can even test the connection here. So without writing any code, I was able to set up a sync between these two sources. Now, a really awesome thing that you can do, let's say you wanted to anonymize the data, or let's say you wanted to add some computed column. You can absolutely do that here. So let's say I have my row in my first args. I can do something like this. Let's say there's a social security number. I want to obfuscate that. Maybe I import a library called import anon. This is a fake library, of course, but you can imagine you could anonymize the social security number. Or maybe you want to add some computed column. You can do that with 1 + 1, for example, and then you just return this. So now, when it syncs every row, this Python code would get executed on that row, transforming the data in flight. Pretty awesome. Great. Now that we have the data integration pipeline, let me take a look. Okay, I'm gonna pause for a few seconds and see if there's any questions, burning questions people might have. Is there an overview of default available sources you can connect to Azure? Yes. So in our docs, and I'll share after this, we have a whole page dedicated to data integrations. And in there, you'll see things like Microsoft SQL Server or Event Hub or Cosmo DB or so I'm missing some of the other ones. But yes, they're in there, the ones that are available. If a pipeline or ML is... Oh, great question. If a pipeline or machine learning model is CPU or GPU heavy, can Mage be configured to run that pipeline on a special server? Mage runs in containers, and that allows you to horizontally, well, also vertically scale, but horizontally scale. So you can set the GPU and CPU required for all your entire project. So let's say you have, I need a base 512 gigabyte memory, half a core, 1 CPU. Then whenever your pipelines run, it'll use that. You can also configure Mage to run your pipelines concurrently in different containers. So let's say you had 1,000 pipelines. Well, theoretically, you can run 1,000 in parallel, but you can also set, I only want up to 100 concurrent pipelines. In addition, for some cloud providers, you'll be able to configure the resources per pipeline. So you'll have a blanket project resource. So I said before, 512, 1 core. But let's say you had a few pipelines that you labeled machine learning, and you can set those pipelines to use greater number of CPU and GPU. Hey, Bram, you
Hey,
came online.
yeah. I had a question as well. I was wondering because
Please.
at the beginning you showed a bit of an architectural picture
Yes.
using Azure Container Instance.
Hmm.
Is there also a setup with Kubernetes and the scaling in and out? And
Yes, actually, yes. Mage works very well with Kubernetes. We have quite a few folks using Mage with Kubernetes. So if you're on AWS, EKS, GCP, the Kubernetes, things like that. Also Kubernetes on Azure as well.
yeah, okay, cool.
Yes,
I think
we designed Mage to work really well with Kubernetes and the native container services. So by default, the Terraform scripts will deploy to the cloud provider's native container services, just because those are simpler and more cost effective. But we also have Terraform templates that will help you deploy to Kubernetes on those cloud providers.
okay, cool. Is there,
Awesome, great
by the
question.
way, just to interrupt you, sorry.
No, please.
Is there maybe any managed Mage servers coming in the future?
Great question. Absolutely. In the future, we definitely will have two ways you can run Mage. You can go to Mage and we'll have a cloud hosted version where you'll just bring your data, you'll use Mage, it runs on our servers. We'll also have a hybrid deployment where we'll be able to easily, quickly launch in your VPC, in your cloud, and then we'll manage it for you. But the compute is still on your resources. However, even though we'll have that, our team, the community, is dedicated to making Mage very, very easy, very simple to manage, to scale up, to maintain, so that you don't need a giant team dedicated just to maintain and upkeep your running orchestration tool.
Thomas has another nice question. How do you earn a living?
Or do you live on tap water and love? Okay, well, I do live off of, I do feed off of, well, feed is a strong word. I do live off of it's so, whenever we wake up, this whole team, we wake up and we see so many people just, their work more fun, they're enjoying work more, their work is easier, they're able to get stuff done faster using Mage, and that's just been a huge that's just a huge energy boost and huge motivation for us, and that really drives us. So I live off of that. Now, tap water, yep, I drink tap water. How do I make a living? Well, I make a living if you all use Mage. If you all don't use Mage, well, I'll have to drink something worse than tap water.
Yeah.
But please keep using Mage. Great
All
question,
right,
by the
all
way.
right.
Awesome. So
I'll interrupt again if we see any questions popping up.
yes, please do. Please do. Don't hesitate. The next pipeline I want to show you, for those that know about dbt, we'll build a standard pipeline where we can mix and match dbt models and even non-dbt models. So what is dbt? For those that don't know dbt, it's this awesome library where you can write SQL and you can have your SQL models know about each other, depend on each other, refer from one another. It's an awesome framework. Now, typically what you do is you clone or you install the core version of dbt, and then you run it yourself, or you use dbt cloud, or you use Mage to not only build your model, but run it. And let me show you what that looks like. So I have dbt already set up, and Mage works out of the box with dbt. When you start Mage for the first time, it'll create this empty dbt folder. If you have an existing dbt project, drag and drop it there, and bam, it'll work. So I created this demo project, and I'm going to connect to Postgres. So I have my profile set up here for Postgres. Awesome. So step one is I'm going to add my models. So here you can create a new model. You can run all your models, or you can add a single model. So I'm going to add my second dbt model. Now, when I add this, it just magically knows all the refs. So let's say I had, this is referring to my first model, it will just add my first model. That way you can create the entire dependency lineage here. Now, let's go ahead and test this. I want to run this, and let's see what happens. So what's great is you can not only write your code, your SQL code for your DBT model, you can run it against your target. So I'm running this against Postgres, and you can get a preview of it. So here it's running. Okay, awesome. Let's look at the preview. Awesome. I was able to preview my DBT model, what it would look like if this ran and it actually created the model. So down here, here's another step. Now, before I get to this, it's pretty basic. DBT model, passing data to another DBT model using the refs. But what if I want to mix and match a non-DBT model? So we have data from, let's say I have a data loader here, and it's called MySQL product purchases. Let's go ahead and add this. So this is just grabbing data from the Microsoft SQL Server that we synced data. Remember that data integration pipeline? We took data from a blob storage and then we put it into Microsoft SQL. This is that right here. Let's go ahead and run this and let's see what happens. It should work. Okay, it looks like, let's get a preview of it. And then, awesome, it does work, great. So now that we have this data, we can take this and drag it to this. And now this becomes a source. So in DBT, there's a concept of source. That's how you can refer to non-DBT models. And Mage will handle all that for you. So now that it's a source, this will do a left join. So this is referring to the first model that you saw up here. And it's going to do a left join on the data that was produced from here. And now I can run this and get a preview of it as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at the logs. It's going to run, join, and then ta-da. Awesome. Looking good, looking good. You can also see the compiled SQL. Afterwards, you can see the compiled SQL here. Okay, you get it. It'll finish, and then it'll run just like that. Awesome. You can even see the compiled SQL here. Oh, no, never mind. Yep, right there. So the compiled SQL. Just like that. Here's the output, and then here's even the lineage for that as well. Great. So that's a DBT model pipeline. Okay, before I get to the next part, and there's only 2 parts left, I want to go over how we can trigger these, how we can set these up to run recurringly, and I want to show you the monitoring. I'm going to pause for 5 seconds, 10 seconds to see if anyone has any questions. 10, 9.
I didn't see any questions coming in. I have a couple of questions, but I'll wait till the end because it's more for the end.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, I'll just jump right into the next part. So triggers. Now that we've built these awesome pipelines, let's run them. So let's go here to this transform data pipeline. There's 3 types of triggers. One is a schedule. What's great is you can create multiple schedules. I can do something hourly on the weekdays, for example. And then I can, of course, choose one hourly, daily, choose a custom one. So I forgot the syntax. I forgot the syntax, it's cron syntax, but you can set up, pretend we did a cron syntax. We can set up hourly on the weekends, and then maybe every 6 hours on the weekdays. So that's really great that you can do that here. So every 6 hours on weekdays, and just pretend it's cron syntax. I don't remember it. So here I have 2 triggers. Amazing. Now this will just run as is. But what if I want to run via an event? So let's go to our ETL pipeline. Let's create a trigger. We can trigger this pipeline from an event. So example, let's say, I don't have it set up. I already have AWS. But let's say you had an event in Azure Event Hub, and you configured it so that whenever you, great question. Okay, can you do a trigger ETL where yes, you can. You can. So what you can do is you can have sensors. I'll go back to that trigger. So let's say we have, let's say this one. Okay. Actually, no, let's go to the DBT one, because the DBT one requires the integration pipeline to finish. So what we can do is we can add a sensor. So we can say wait until ETL is done, like that. Then what we do here, we can make the blue one depend on that. So here we'll drag this to that, and then what was the pipeline called? ETL pipeline. Okay, just like that. So now what will happen is when this runs, it will wait until this pipeline with this unique name finishes, and only when it finishes can this one run. But what's great is that this model can still run because it doesn't depend on that ETL pipeline. So then once this is done, this will run, and then this will run. So that's how you can have them depend on each other. Okay, so the trigger, let me just go back to the trigger one. So you can set this up. So let's say I set this up for an event. Let's just say I don't have the Azure one set up, but let's just say I have it set up. You can have Mage listen to an event, for example, a new file added to blob storage. And then once you save that, every single time a new file is uploaded to blob via some prefix, you can have this pipeline trigger so that you don't have to do it every hour. You can just do this on demand. So let's say I uploaded one file right now, this will trigger, and then a couple of minutes later, someone else uploads a file, this will trigger. And then the final way to trigger your pipelines, so let's just pretend it's here, you can create an API endpoint. So I can make a post request to this endpoint, and anything I pass in my payload, for example, let's say I wanted to pass in a unique key or a country or a user ID, that payload is accessible throughout the entire pipeline. So you see here, this keyword arguments will, if I print this out, it will print out whatever was in that payload. So that's how you can create really dynamic pipelines. So that's how we trigger. Now, let me show you, if there's no questions, let me show you monitoring. Once all this is running, really amazing, great. But we all know 20% of the work is building pipeline. 80% is making sure it keeps going, it keeps working as is. So I shared with you before, you can add data validations alongside your code. That's great. Soon, in next week's release, you'll be able to use Great Expectations with Mage very seamlessly. It's a native integration of Great Expectations. Keep an eye out for that. But once you have all those, let's go ahead and check, what if there's an error? What if something happens in your pipeline? Well, you can configure Mage to alert you whenever there's an error or even a success. So there's this configuration for your entire project. You can set up alerts to be alerted via email, Microsoft Teams, Slack. You can do it on a status basis, failure, success, cancel. So that's one way you can get alerted. We'll have alerting via PagerDuty as well in the future. In addition, if there's an error, can we see some sort of roadmap with features? Of course, absolutely. We have a public roadmap that we keep up to date daily. We update it daily. Yeah, I can share that out with you afterwards as well. And it's also, not only is it a roadmap, it'll tell you what month we're releasing it, and it will categorize all the features, etc. So I'll show you that as well. Now, let's say we come back. We want to inspect our runs, our pipeline runs. You can look at all the logs, but let's break it down even more. I'm jumping into one of my schedules, this hourly schedule. I can hop into one of these. So let's say this ran a 1300 hour. I can see all the block runs. So this was 3 blocks. I can see how fast it created. But check this out. I can click on a row and I can see the data that was created by that step at that time. And this happens for all the runs. So we capture all, and you can easily take that data, use it to replace maybe missing data, broken data, etc. And keep track of it and even debug. Maybe a metric went wrong on this specific day. You can really dig in and see, oh, I see why the metric went wrong. This is not correct. So that's really, okay, great. Next, I can jump into a specific one and look at the logs. Of course, this was successful, but if it errored, you can then click on a row and really dig into the errors. Let me decrease this real quick. Yeah, so you can really dig into the errors. We have structured logging here. So not only will the system log it, but in your code, you can log as well. You can output structured logging and it will capture it all here. Okay, so these are all successes. Now that we have structured logging, not only, so for those that are wondering, we will write this log to disk, and it is up to you to keep that, we talk about the file system, Azure Storage. It will write to Azure Storage. And if you want to persist it somewhere else or put it into, let's say, Datadog or Kibana, you can do that as well. Or you can configure Mage to write the logs directly to those stores yourself as well. You can configure Mage to do that. And then finally, monitoring. I already have a day of running this, but you can see how many completed. When there's errors, you can see how many errors. You can see the block runs. Maybe this load completed more. Some of these failed more. Ooh, version control. I love these questions. What do we have in terms of version control? Well, remember, Mage is reading files from your file system. So you use Git for this. And you can use this terminal. So when you're running locally, you just use your terminal, your own terminal on your computer to do git commit, git init, etc. But you can also use this to do git init, for example. We probably don't have Git set up, but you can use the terminal to commit your code and push it to GitHub. We also have supported GitHub Actions, GitLab pipelines, and build kite templates to set up CI/CD. So this is what a lot of people who use Mage do. They have their team develop locally or in the cloud. Each one is developing separately. I have a branch, you have a branch. We do our git commit, we create a branch, we push to GitHub, create a pull request. You review it, done. I merge it in. For the GitHub action or GitLab, whatever you want to use, we'll then kick off, take that code, package it in a Docker image with Mage Docker image as the base, then package it together with your code, and then push that to Azure Container Instances. Then your Azure Container Instance is updated with that code, and then it will reflect here, just like that. So that's one way of doing it. Is there a VS Code extension? No, there's not quite yet. We have that on our roadmap. It's being asked by several people. Now, technically, you could still build all these pipelines, and we have a guide on this without using the UI. You could just use VS Code, Sublime, Vim to write all this code, because again, this is just a bunch of code. And if you look at this metadata YAML, this might look a little intense, but it's pretty simple. Here is an array of all your blocks, and that's about it. So not that complicated. And so you can technically just use your favorite text editor to do that, but you'll lose out on a lot of the cool bells and whistles, like the previews, being able to see the charts, things like that. So one of the, I would say the innovation, the revolutionary piece about Mage is where code is best expressed, we really help you write that code better, faster, easier. But everywhere else that doesn't require code, where using a user interface to augment, to do things faster, better, less error prone, that's where the UI will augment your developer experience. And so yes, yeah, you can use VS Code, but we think that using Mage will, the UI part of it will help you and give you a better coding experience. Okay, so the last part, I think I was on monitoring, and I think the last thing I want to show you is just runtime. So we do track the runtime of your pipelines and blocks so that over time you can see, hey, maybe why is my data blocks taking longer? I only ran this once with 5 seconds, but over time you'll be able to see, okay, is it degrading? Why is it doubling in runtime when it's not even doubling in data time? What about writing tests so the data that you pull are correct? Oh, absolutely, tests. Remember, engineering best practices built in is one of our core design principles. And part of what that means is having tests built in, really encouraging test-driven development. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. You can write the test in line, just like this. So let's say I wanted to test the length. I wanted to make sure this is greater than or equal to 1. So I can run this, and then it will, whenever I run this block of code, it will run this test alongside of it. And even when I run this pipeline end to end, it'll run the test alongside of it. See, one test passed. Let's go ahead and make this fail. So pretend I wanted to make this one fail. Awesome. So let's go ahead and run this now, and we'll see that the test will fail. And I can write as many of these as I want. So you get a lot of unit testing with your data. Now, see, it failed, and it'll tell me. And then I mentioned before, Great Expectations, a very deep native integration of the Great Expectations will come out in next week's release. Keep an eye out for that. And that's how you can validate the data after it's already stored. Okay, how is security implemented in Mage? Great question. When you deploy this to your cloud provider, there's two levels of security. One is gating the network level. So it will sit behind a load balancer, and that load balancer will already automatically block all incoming traffic to port 6789, which is the default port. Now, when you deploy via Terraform, we'll take your current IP and we'll allow that single IP in the security groups so that from your current machine, you'll have access to it. Everyone else will be blocked. But let's say you have other teammates you want to use it, for example, or look at it. You have to go and get their IP and add it to that list, that allow list. What other people have done, they've set up Cloudflare, they set up some other tunneling tactics, but other people have implemented their own way to do network security on the gating level. Now, the second level we have is user authentication. So I'm signed in as the admin user, but you can add users. So let's say I had a cool person. Their email is cool@mage.ai. We have role-based. So I can set this person to be an admin. That means they can manage users. I can set them as an editor. That means they can read and write. Or I can set them as a viewer, which means they can only read. And I give them a password like ABCD 1 2 3 4 5. Oh, that's a bad password. ABCD 1 2 3 4 5. Okay, but I don't even remember the password I thought. Oh, maybe this works. Okay, so now I created a user. Now you can log in as that user. So even if your IP address was allowed at the network level, you still wouldn't be able to use Mage unless you logged in there. Great question. Okay, that is actually the end of the presentation. There's so much more, but you'd be here with me for a whole week, and I don't want that for you. I wouldn't mind, but I don't want that for you. So I'll stop there and open it up to some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tommy. Really cool presentation, a really cool demo. Was really excited about this one.
Thank you.
I was wondering, at the beginning of the talk, you mentioned that it's a replacement for Airflow.
Yes.
And how does it compare, or what does it do different than Airflow?
Absolutely, great question. So there's a few things that we differentiate from Airflow, and I go back to our core design principles, and there's four actually. The first one is easy developer experience. We really focus on an easy developer experience. As great and powerful as Airflow is, still the developer experience is just not up to date. And what I mean by that is, Airflow started in 2014. I was there early on when it was just in its nascent form, and it's very powerful. There's so many things you can do with it, but the developer experience hasn't caught up to the standards of toolings, modern day tooling, modern day code libraries that is expected from engineers these days. And part of easy developer experience and how Mage shows that is through their user interface. You no longer have to build a data pipeline in your editor and try to imagine what the results would look like and then have to test it in a different environment all at the very end. You can interact with your code, interact with your pipeline as you build it. Also, we make it very easy to mix and match your different languages you want. Now, the second way we differentiate is we treat data as a first-class citizen. So Airflow, it's a general workflow orchestrator, really awesome. You can call out to different services, it can literally do anything. Now, yes, you can use XComs to pass data around, but that's also an anti-pattern. With Mage, everything is all about data. Everything you do is data. All we do is pull data from places, move data to different steps, and run your code on that data. That's all we do, and we focus on data. And so every step in your pipeline produces data. Now that's automatically version, catalog. Okay, no, something got highlighted, but I think I answered that one already. Okay, so
sorry.
Everything is partitioned, catalog, versioned, and we also really focus on just the data movement. And then the third way we differentiate is engineering best practices built in. And part of that means is you saw earlier, very modular, reusable code. And that is possible through our design, where we separate the execution logic of the code of your steps from the dependency logic. And another way we showed engineering best practices is through the test-driven development, the tests, the validations, the data quality checks, through great expectations, things like that. So those are some of the ways. And of course, the fourth way we differentiate is our fourth core design principle is scaling made simple. And that means you can be a single person on a single data engineering team and really be able to scale this up and maintain it without losing much sleep. At Airbnb, there's a team of I forgot the size, 7, 9 people who maintain Airflow. It's the Airflow team. And this is actually quite common, that there's dedicated people just to maintain and update and fix and debug Airflow, the running Airflow instances in people's companies. And we're taking a different approach. We're making it so easy to scale up, so easy to maintain, so easy to configure that you probably never need a cloud-hosted version of Mage and pay a ton of money like you do for other managed services.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
There's a question here. Are you planning to implement multi-factor authentication for security? Absolutely. That's absolutely on the roadmap. Security is a huge priority for us as well. We want you to feel secure with your data. Although this does run on your own cloud, we want to do our best to make sure that it's secure. You're able to easily secure it yourself. That's why we did originally ship with the user authentication. And that's a very big feature. It's not only a big feature, it's actually not a common feature in other tools out there. Of course, it is in Airflow because we built that early on at Airbnb, but it's actually not a common feature in open source tools. But we just felt that security is a huge paramount, and role-based security as well. It's just it's better for the end users, and it lets you sleep well at night. So we added that. So absolutely, MFA is on the roadmap.
Cool. Then we have another question.
Nice. Is there a plan to integrate with Open Data Hub? Well, it's funny. One of our investors, Sarut, he was actually my engineering manager at Airbnb. He is the CTO and co-founder at Acro Data, and his co-founder is they both worked at LinkedIn on Data Hub. So absolutely, we do have plans to integrate with that.
Nice. I was also wondering, because Airflow was just is in public preview now as a managed service within Azure Data Factory. I was wondering if there's going to be a Mage managed service. What will it look like? Will it be something like Airflow in the Azure Data Factory or another solution?
Absolutely. So a managed service in these cloud providers, I can imagine, would be something like it could be its own service. It would run as its own service. And so, because I wouldn't say it fits directly into Data Factory, it has some capabilities like what Data Factory does, but we would see it as its own managed service.
Okay, cool. Nice one. Well, I don't have any questions. I remember that at the beginning, there was a question about the integrations that there are by default. Can you maybe show?
Yes, the drop downs. I don't have the. Okay, maybe you go here. For some reason you can't see the select drop downs when I share screen. So if you, where is it? Here. So we have things like available sources. This might not capture all of the available sources. We have some that are still in development, some we're still testing, but there's just a ton of different sources here, and then quite a bit of destinations as well, and a few coming, few in the works. But we also use Singer Spec. So technically, whatever is out there, whatever sources, taps, targets are out there, we can quickly add them as teams, as companies need them, because it's a small lift for us. All we have to do is find the open source project, then we test it, validate it, clean it up, we standardize it, and then we just add it into Mage. So it's quite easy to add. So if you don't see something on here that you need, chances are someone has built it using Singer, and it's very quick for us to add as well. We also have other folks, because it's so easy to add, we have other contributors adding things. For example, the last thing was, for example, Pipedrive, syncing data from Pipedrive, for example. So it's quite easy to add as well. So those are just some of those data integrations.
So maybe it's also possible for the people who want to try or want to use it and say, hey, I'm missing an integration, that they can maybe contribute themselves by adding the functionality to it.
Yes, and it's all in Python, so it's very easy to add, very quick to add.
Cool.
And the community is very supportive. The team, we're all very supportive. So it actually one of the great things about Mage, and it's not just us speaking, is so many other folks have said the community aspect, how fast we respond, how fast other people help, how fast turnaround of features are. You don't have to submit an issue and wait around for 3 months for someone to respond. You get a response really quickly. You won't need to wait around a couple of weeks for a feature, a couple of months for a feature. We push them out quite frequently.
Nice, cool. Sorry, I have another question.
Please.
At the beginning, you showed the little architectural picture. Is there also some documentation about what you advise as a setup, or how the current setup is? Because I saw there was like a Terraform template, or there were some templates. Is there also a little bit of a description, or how the setup looks like?
Yes. So the setup, if you just use Mage locally, the setup is very simple, because again, we wanted to make scaling simple, and we want an easy developer experience. So we don't, behind the scenes, we don't use a ton of different services. If you use some other tools out there, you got to spin up something, and you got to spin up 10 different services. So Mage is quite simple behind the scenes. You want to install it via pip, you want to install it via Conda, no problem. You just install, then you do Mage start, bam, up and running. But if you want to use Docker, we will run in a Docker container as well, and by default, it'll connect to SQLite. No need for Redis. But when you deploy it in production, there's a little bit more setup, just because of the networking, the file storage, and we also will use Postgres in production to store, and Postgres or SQLite, it stores the run history, the results, things like that, the status of it. Now, if you're looking for a diagram of how all these services are connected, well, I can share with you the diagram I shared before, this one specifically for Azure. If you want one for AWS, GCP, we can share that one as well. But this one specifically for Azure.
Yeah, cool. If you could share that, it would be nice.
Yes.
All right, cool. Well, I don't have any questions at the moment. I don't see any other questions popping in anymore.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for having us here. We're super excited and honored to be here. Hopefully we can see you again in the future, and hope to see you using Mage. Would be great to connect and talk with each one of you.
Yeah, Tommy, thank you so much for joining. And for the people who just watched this amazing talk, or are going to review it later, also just join the Slack workspace if you have any questions. I know for myself that I've seen people react really quite quickly to questions. So please join it. And of course, thank you again, Tommy. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Please do not forget a little bit of self-promotion. please do not forget to subscribe to the channel and give some likes for the talk. And thank you all, and have a good day. For me, a good evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
thank you. Bye-bye.